Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's briefing as we celebrate the record turnout among Asian American Pacific Islanders this election cycle. My name is Christine Chen, Executive Director for Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote. We are a national nonpartisan organization focused on empowering Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders through electoral organizing. By working with our network of community-based organizations and trusted messengers in 28 states, we implement culturally appropriate strategies to effectively mobilize the API vote. Throughout the cycle, many of you were able to utilize the findings from our 2020 Asian American Voter Survey conducted by APIAVote in partnership with API Data and Asian American Advancing Justice, AJC. It was the only national Asian American pre-election voter survey focused on Asian American positions towards the candidates, political parties, and various issues such as health, jobs, economy, education, environment, and gun control. It has been exciting to see that according to TargetSmart, in 2016, a total of 751,778 API voters cast a ballot in the presidential battleground states for the presidential election. This year, in the early vote alone, there are over 911,000 API voters who turned out. That's 21% more voters than the entire 2016 API turnout in these key states. In every single battleground state, the API early vote turnout surged relative to 2016 by more than any other group. We wanted to provide some context behind the numbers. It's a combination of efforts from the API community, the campaigns and political parties, and the circumstances we're all facing this year. Over the last 5 years, APIAVote, alongside our partners, laid out the groundwork for this impressive surge in turnout by utilizing state-specific grassroots outreach to create the conditions needed for API voters to feel confident and empowered to cast their ballot. Asian Americans are the only racial group that is majority immigrant. The API umbrella is a diverse community that has over 50 ethnicities and dozens more languages. Being an immigrant is part of the American story, and it is more important that these voters have access to translated materials regarding voting, their rights, and the election process. A prime example is our mail program that we've been executing every midterm and presidential since 2012. This year, APIAVote and our partners invested in sending 2 rounds of mail, translate into 15 languages, reaching communities in each state with specific language needs for 700,000 households. This is coupled with phone banking, text banking, and a digital campaign. Each communication strategy also provided essential information about early voting options, individual voting rights, and access to the Asian Election Protection Hotline. I'm excited to introduce several community leaders from across America to share the state-specific strategies and the unique stories from those on the front lines during doing this work in these battleground states. In a year of close elections, we saw Biden win the state of Pennsylvania by only 54,000 votes. In early votes alone, Asian American Pacific Islander voters made up 78,000 early votes in the state, which is wider than Biden's margin of victory. As the country turns toward Georgia, we should recognize that API voters in 2016 cast 40,000 early votes, and in 2020, it was 120,000. To share their stories, I'll turn it over to our leaders who work in the North and Southeastern states. We have Chavi Koneru, who's the Executive Director for North Carolina Asian Americans Together, Stephanie Cho, Executive Director for Asian American Advancing Justice Atlanta, Michelle Kim, who's the Civic Engagement Coordinator for SEAMAAC in Pennsylvania, and Nancy Nguyen from Executive Director for VietLead in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Chavi Koneru, co-founder and executive director of North Carolina Asian Americans Together, or NCAT. We were founded in 2016 and since have been the only organization focused specifically on voter engagement in Pan-Asian communities across the state of North Carolina. So in North Carolina, as you may know, ballots that were postmarked by Election Day and that were part of the curing process were counted up until last Thursday. So we don't have post-election numbers yet, but based on just the numbers during the early vote period and absentee ballots, not even including election day or the ballots that weren't counted, the total number of votes cast by Asian Americans in the early vote and absentee ballot period were over 30% more than the total number of votes cast by Asian Americans in 2016. This is a really big deal for a community whose voices have been suppressed by the model minority myth, then further oppressed by the lack of recognition in the South, and then had to overcome the hurdles of a complex vote by mail process, had to expose themselves potentially to the risk of masks not being required in polling places. This turnout is truly incredible. And I think that conversation shouldn't be about what was on the ballot and who won, but about like the incredible progress we've made. We talked to so many people on the ground who had voted for the first time and realized the need to exercise their voices despite all of the challenges. And I think that's truly incredible.
Thank you. And let's go ahead and head on over to Georgia.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Cho. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. So proud to be in Georgia. Our elections never end. So we are really proud of the numbers here, and particularly the new electorate of Asian Americans that have really come out and voted. So by the numbers, we have about a little over 200,000 registered AAPIs in Georgia. And AAPI early voters exceeded the total of 2016 turnout by 59%, which is huge. And of the early voters, around 30,000 or 27% voted for the first time in their life, which is huge, right? When we're talking about the new electorate, when we're talking about the new numbers of Georgia, it is folks that have moved to Georgia, it's people who are newly naturalized, and it's young folks. We are that new electorate, which is so exciting. So us, along with Black women voters, along with Latino voters, along with young people, really have changed the sort of trajectory of what Georgia looks like. And turnout, as everyone knows, doesn't happen overnight. And so we're part of that growing new majority of coalition of new voters for the South. It's led by tons and tons of organizations. And so we're so proud to be part of it. And so now we're moving on to our runoffs. And so we're still at play here in Georgia. So if you want more information about what that plan looks like, let us know.
Thank you for that recap. And we are looking forward to seeing what happens in Georgia. Let's go ahead and head over to Pennsylvania, first with SEAMAAC and then VietLead.
Hi, everyone. I am Michelle, the Civic Engagement Coordinator at SEAMAAC. I feel really lucky to be here and on a panel with so many powerful and amazing Asian women and also just amazing organizations that are doing incredible work. In terms of SEAMAAC's role, we stand as one of the oldest and largest refugee-founded agencies in the Philadelphia area, serving constituencies from 20 distinct linguistic populations. And through our 36 years of advocacy and community organizing, social services, and civic engagement work, we've been building trust and power in our community to ensure that our voices are heard, which really played out in this particular election cycle. What really attributed to this was when the stay-at-home order went into effect back in March due to COVID, SEAMAAC launched a hunger relief program that really aimed to serve our immigrant, refugee, unsheltered, and working class people in South Philly, and was as one of the few organizations to operate without pause during the pandemic. We really were able to expand our reach to more communities in our area, including African refugees and Latinx immigrants. As our impact grew, our civic engagement work continued to be an integral part of our work through things like English civics literature in all food distribution boxes, census, voter registration, civic education work at our hunger relief and community sites, and civic engagement services and resources really provided to all clients and ELL students. We saw a lack of the language access, misinformation, and particularly the confusion towards vote by mail and that complicated process, and really just the election process in general, all as forms of voter suppression. And really to address this, we met voters where they were at in our community, particularly LEP voters and voters with that limited digital access. This really happened through strategic door knocking and on the ground community building efforts. Through that, we're able to safely knock on 4,000 doors with multilingual staff and volunteers who really had those one-on-one conversations with API voters about voting by mail and really building their voting plan. So these strong relationships with also not just community members, but community organizations, including our table of partners, really helped broaden our reach through geography and ethnic diversity, and in collaborative efforts like joint phone banks, sharing tools and resources, and really taking on a key leadership role for these organizations. So really all of this work was essential in increasing the API voter turnout in South Philadelphia community particularly. But on election day, SEAMAAC really leveraged these relationships and community presence in South Philadelphia by being at 14 different polling sites with over 220 volunteers and staff on the ground. And we are able to provide in-language resources, language assistance, monitored poll site operations, provided transportation, administered exit polls, and ensured Black, Brown, and API communities felt safe voting through de-escalation and election protection support. We really think our presence allowed there for only isolated instances of voter suppression and intimidation at the polls, and allowed API voter turnout to really increase throughout South Philadelphia. If there were issues, we were seen as a trusted resource because we relied on those strong relationships we were able to build up in these last 36 years. And that's it, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm gonna jump into my 2 minutes because that's all we have. Hi, everybody. My name is Nancy Nguyen. I'm the executive director of VietLead, also in Philadelphia, and co-director of the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance, which is a statewide C4 organization. I also want to name that, you know, it's telling that much of the leadership on this panel are femme. And I think, you know, Asian women leading the charge on this work, it's not a surprise to me, but just wanted to name that labor. So like SEAMAAC in Philadelphia, I want to also name that though, you know, VietLead, I'm very proud to be here as part of VietLead. There are, both of us are part of a network called the APIAVote Power Caucus. It's a 13-member organization, 13-member organization that spans actually Asian American communities across Pennsylvania. It includes a bunch of organizations that weren't able to make it today because, you know, there's so many states to cover. But these organizations like Asian Americans United, CARE, Wuri Center, they have been building deep relationships in the Asian American community for 5+ years, some over 10 years, like SEAMAAC. And that it really takes like that deep relationship building to move our communities in a time of such crisis and change. One thing that was really important in Pennsylvania was that this is the first year that we were able to do mail-in ballots, right? In the mail-in ballots, there were a lot of, there was a lot of fear in terms of making sure that our communities were able to understand the process, get support in the process, in the languages that they need. And I think it attests to all of these organizations' work that there were more folks who turned in mail-in ballots early voting in the Asian American community in Pennsylvania than all of the folks who voted in 2016. I also wanted to name that the Power Caucus organizes, and we coordinated on the C3 side, and we're able to also some of the key organizations of the Power Caucus, namely Asian Americans United and VietLead, were together able to form APIPA, the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance, which is the first statewide organization. We launched it in June of 2020. And in the span of 6 months, with the support of the community of folks around us, made close to 2 million attempts to voters, Asian American voters across Pennsylvania, including 1.3 million calls in 10 languages, including 55,000 in-language calls to elders in Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Korean, Bengali, Urdu, Gujarati, and more. Almost 350 mail-in pieces in Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Arabic, and English, and digital ads in those languages that were seen 7.6 million times. And so those are a lot of numbers. I can drop the numbers for anybody, but I think that the scale of our work would not have been possible without the support and the network and the experience of 5 to 8 years of work on the C3 side in PA that led to the formation of the C4. And, also, doing this work in the battleground, in a battleground state, knowing how important our communities are in the margin of victory, not just at the state level, but in various counties across Pennsylvania, is very important. And finally, I just want to say that, there's a lot of work. We want to build this long-term in South Asian, Korean, Viet, and Chinese, and other communities across the state. We want to move an API legislative agenda at the state level and prepare ourselves for governor and Senate races in 2020. And so we're really looking, I think that the formation and the sophistication of our work was only possible also because there were organizations that launched before us, like, NCAT and, organizations in Georgia, et cetera. And so, yeah, we're really excited for what we were able to accomplish in Pennsylvania in such a short time, and really looking forward to what we can do in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy, for that really great comprehensive look. I think we have a couple of questions. What we'll do is we have 3 sets of different panelists. So we'll go ahead and ask a few of the questions, but we'll also leave time at the end to be able to direct questions to everyone specific or for if the other questions come up as well. So for North Carolina, there was a question, was the API early and absentee votes more than 30% than total API votes cast in 2016, or total votes of everyone who voted in 2016?
Of API voters in 2016.
And then also with in Georgia, there is a lot of people are paying attention and directing their energy to Georgia. So there is interest in terms of what are some strategies in terms of what you're planning on doing to get people out, and also are there certain things that you saw that really came together during this time period for the presidential that you want to replicate heading into this runoff?
I think the messages around issues around COVID, issues around healthcare, issues around immigration, I think really rang true. I think that happened across the board for Asian Americans. And then I would say for us, really targeting specific populations that were getting misinformation via WeChat, via Kakao, WhatsApp, and doing that in language work. The sort of boost we got at the very end in Georgia, I think also helped, and will definitely help for the runoff. We finally got one Asian language we have voting materials in one Asian language in the state of Georgia, which is huge. It doesn't sound that exciting maybe in other states, but it's definitely big in Georgia. And so that materials are going to be available for the runoff, which is, I think, going to be really important. That language is Korean, but I think that getting that going, I think, was helpful in the momentum. But really, I think it was the issue around COVID, I think, has really galvanized a lot of Asian Americans, both young and old, to really get more involved, especially because they're seeing how it's affecting them. There's some local wins that also really galvanize people in the area of Gwinnett, where a county which has majority Asian Americans live in. It's a huge concentration, and that change in the local government has really changed over. So I think over time, just like everybody said, the wins don't happen overnight. You've been working and organizing and talking to folks for years and years. And then this is the year that everything sort of came together, I think, too. Also, we just really have that powerful new electorate that really galvanized people too, which I think that combination of Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, really, that combination really, I think, has helped a lot.
Wonderful. So right now we're going to go ahead and switch over and turn our attention to the Midwest, and then we'll go ahead and bring everyone back at the end. But as we proceed with the rest of the panelists, there were a couple themes or questions that are coming out in the chat room. And we also encourage everyone to use the Q&A, so that way it's easier for us to identify the questions. But I think there are some key interests in terms of hearing specifically strategies that individuals and organizations had implemented, as well as specific messaging, if any of you guys could also touch upon that as you continue to present. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and bring on Michigan. Turning to our attention to the Midwest, in Michigan, API voters quadrupled their turnout by early vote alone in 2020 to 77,000 compared to their early vote turnout in 2016. We'll hear from leaders working in the Midwest. Here we have Chai Moua, who's the Community Power Coalition Director from Freedom in Wisconsin. Linda Herr, Executive Director for Asian American Organizing Project in Minnesota. Christina Doan, Director of Public Policy from CAPI USA in Minnesota. We also have Richard Mui, President of APIAVote Michigan, and Laura Misumi, who's the Executive Director and Board President of Rising Voices of Asian American Families. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with Chai.
Good morning, everyone. Chai Moua, Community Power Coalition Director with Freedom Inc., but also Program Consultant with Freedom Action Now, which is our first API Southeast Asian Black C4 in the state of Wisconsin. I think a lot of the successes that came out of Wisconsin didn't come overnight. We have spent the last 4 or 5 years building coalition, not just investing in individuals, but really investing in organizations and building infrastructures and building political home for API communities all over the state of Wisconsin. And we've seen how that has been successful because in Wisconsin, 6 out of the 7 counties that we did work in, that we invested in, turned out progressive voters. And we know that not only are they turning out API progressive voters, but they're turning out other ally progressive voters, because just the existence of these organizations we invested in has started and sparked different conversations within the communities. We've also really proud of our election defense work that we've done to make sure that after what we've seen happen in the spring, during our spring election, to make sure that our November election, that folks could actually access the polls safely and had people there to support them. So we actually trained and got out over 100 election defenders in the state of Wisconsin to election defend at the polls. In addition to the election defense work that we did, we also held Joy at the Poll events. We took food trucks out, we took DJs out, we took music out, and partied at the polls so that our community, Black and Brown and Southeast Asian communities, felt welcomed at the polls. And that was very effective. As we know, some of the lines were long, so having the food trucks there and the music there to keep folks in line was very effective. Also, Freedom Inc. has always done mutual aid work. And everything that we do at Freedom Inc. That works gets duplicated at our partner organizations that we fund. And our mutual aid work really expanded this year. Rich really helped us during the pandemic in voter outreach. We launched through our mutual aid work the We Keep Us Safe campaign. We keep us safe during the pandemic, and we keep us safe during in the community against police brutality. And so through that, we held pop-ups. We were giving out food. We were giving out gift cards. We were giving out face masks and safety supplies that our communities needed, because our communities, many of our community members were still essential workers. And this has, the effects of that is that it has mobilized and launched a whole new group of leaders who were then organizing within their own apartment complexes, organizing within their own universe, their own, so doing a lot of that RVP work for us that we weren't able to, that we actually needed a lot during this shift in the work. Also Freedom Inc. does work with Black, Hmong, Khmer, Chen, Burmese, and other refugee populations in Wisconsin that are forgotten, that aren't usually remembered as part of being part of that API umbrella. And so we really launched a lot of in-language videos in 4 different languages. We and our partners did a lot of step-by-step videos and a lot of testimonial videos of the importance of folks getting out to vote this year. Let's see, what else am I missing? Yeah, but on top of that, we always early vote and mail-in ballots is not a preferred method for many of our community members. And so we had to be really creative in the ways that we were assisting folks to request for the absentee ballots, how we were assisting folks on filling out their absentee ballots if they didn't know how to. And so I think through that, we were able to introduce and mobilize many of our community members to move to voting absentee. But I think that's pretty much it for Wisconsin. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's head over to your neighbor in Minnesota with Linda with AOP and then Cappy.
Hi, everyone. So great to be in the same space with you all today. My name is Linda Her. I'm the Executive Director of Asian American Organism Project. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. AOP, our mission is to advance Asian Minnesotans in democracy for a just and equitable society. Our organization is mostly led by young staff and leaders for young people. Here in Minnesota, we've been engaging with young voters between 18 to 35 in every election since 2015. Most of our base are born or immigrated and are raised here in the US. So they growing up learning English through speaking, reading, and writing. In this election and in the past election, they've not been impacted by English barriers or anything of that sort. So this year, as we were really promoting absentee ballots, that wasn't necessarily a barrier, but more so that it takes a couple of steps, right? In terms of voting for the first time as absentee or changes in the laws that had taken place here in Minnesota around extension. And so it took a couple of steps. So we focused a lot of our work in year-long integrated census and voter education. Here in the Twin Cities with young Asian voters, we had pivoted our phone canvassing outreach and to text banking. We also hosted live social media events and campaigns, really focusing on absentee ballot requests and education around how to vote, your voting rights, voter protection. We also sent out 10K mailers. We created a voter guide that centers young Asian people and their experiences and questions, particularly around the impacts of COVID, like anti-Asian discrimination and harm, around like city budgets, policing. And so those were really useful and helpful as we have talked with our young voters since July, all the way up to Get Out the Vote week. We also are a lot of, our effort and work isn't possible without like our community partnership, where we did a lot of co-creation and coordination with 20 plus BIPOC organizations here. Some of those like week-long actions took place online digitally, particularly around our mass mobilization social media toolkit on Get Out the Census and Get Out the Vote. I believe in our experience, the census and election has really strengthened our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color coordination that really stem from the census work and strengthen our efforts to close out the election work strong. Some of that effort and information that allowed us to do the work efficiently and effectively is like our partnership with the Ramsey Hennepin County Elections and the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, where we attend meetings monthly or every other week regards to voter education, outreach, and election information, making sure that our communities receive any changes that may take place. About the election, something we did do different and new this year is really focus on relational organizing. That has really been a key in our work as we train young leaders and voters to make a plan with their parents, family, friends, who may need assistance to vote, and also being aware of voting during times of COVID. A couple of more things is that we launched our Asian language volunteer pilot program to provide translation interpretation at the polls. Even though we do talk to young people, we do end up talking to their parents or elders, right, on the phones. And so we saw the need as young people who are mobile, who can access and understand changes in elections, to be the ones to bridge like our elders and our communities who need that support. And so we're really excited to launch that program. Lastly, we launched a New Narratives podcast to promote and elevate youth and young Asian political activists and cultural voices, experience and leadership in Minnesota. And you know, like a lot of news media outlets, they focus a lot on like older folks, right? And so AOP, we really want to center and really build a strong trajectory for youth and young Asian people in Minnesota by centering their voices, creating spaces, co-creating with them, so that, you know, they are the leaders of the now, they are the powerful vote of the now, and we want to make sure that there's a strong ecosystem here of civic engagement and leadership development for these young people. Thank you.
Wonderful. And then on the other end, we also have social service agencies like Aapi who play an integral role in Minnesota.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Doan. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Aapi USA. Aapi is an immigrant-led organization here in Minnesota, and we provide basic needs, economic empowerment, and civic engagement and public policy programming to more than 6,000 people annually. Really, as a social service organization, we've integrated census and voter outreach in all parts of our programming and utilize the trusted relationships that staff already have with participants to provide them timely and trusted information on voting in the elections. We know that we can't do this alone, so we've also this past year partnered with a 7-member coalition of community-based organizations, many who are also immigrant-led, and also many who serve Asian, African, and Latinx communities to also do this work. And we've really concentrated our effort in a 3-pronged approach this year. First, we know that due to COVID, there has been a lot of limited in-person outreach. So we focused in the areas in which we could, which was through Aapi's food shelf. We provide over 800 households or 5,000 people annually with pre-packed emergency food boxes to meet their food and security needs during this pandemic. And in addition, when individuals come and pick up their food boxes for the month, they're also met with a staff member who are able to share information on the elections and answer any questions that they have in language. We've also pivoted to providing emergency food box deliveries to seniors in our community. And along with those food boxes, we've been able to provide those information on the elections to more than 120 seniors in our communities. Secondly, to really protect our staff and volunteers, we pivoted to an online phone bank strategy and called close to 89,000 API households across the state, reaching eligible voters 36 years of age and older. And in these efforts, we're really dedicated nearly 1,300 hours to these efforts. If you think about it, we are a very small agency with less than 30 staff. So this is a very really intentional effort on behalf of the organization to integrate our voter outreach and make sure our communities' voices were heard this year. And then finally, we increased our presence in local media, Aapi's own social media, and through mailers and voter guides. We hosted a weekly show on a local Hmong radio station and shared information on COVID resources, but also on election resources. And then we also ran radio ads on multiple stations in Hmong, Vietnamese, and Spanish, and supported some ads in local Chinese print media. And then we also sent over 15,000 in-language mailers across the state and helped to produce voter guides in several different languages. So a lot of our efforts this year were really to focus on in-language resources, because a lot of the populations that we serve are older immigrant and refugee communities. We know that we've built the groundwork the last couple of years in partnership and in coalition with many other immigrant-led organizations to do this work, and it would not have been possible without all of those partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Let's head over to Michigan with APIAVote Michigan and then Rising Voices.
Thank you, Christine. My name is Richard Moua. I'm the board president of APIAVote Michigan. And I guess our story this year is similar to a lot of other organizations. It really started with COVID relief efforts, providing care packages and food delivery to those in need, as well as some of the census outreach. And so we partnered, we paired those together when we did outreach to different communities. And from there, really, our effort, I think, was to again, meet the community where they're at. And so we partnered with the Secretary of State in Michigan. They developed a task force to reach non-English speaking citizens. And so we provided, excuse me, we provided translated materials in 6 different languages. We hosted webinars in 3 different languages to reach the community, and especially in terms of, not everybody has the access to go outside. So that was a big effort on our part, and working closely with the Secretary of State. In addition to that, we worked with community partners, particularly in Southeast Michigan, that in terms of giving out the vote, making sure people knew how to get their absentee ballots. Also, then, when the early voting started, as well as some actual voter information or information for the actual election day. So we partnered with local organizations, but then also reached back in the Asian American community, working with different organizations that we had partnered with during the COVID response, and worked with them to reach their community members. And so we're really proud of that effort. We, like the other organizations, we really focused hard on our ground game. So we ended up mailing 10,000 mailers. I think we made over 200,000 phone calls and 465 texts as well to reach the community. So that's an ongoing effort. Like I said, I think what other organizations have said is true, that, we're trying to build that deep relationship. And so it's an ongoing process, and hopefully this will continue. And really, we're going to pivot now. I think we're going to be joining Advancing Justice Atlanta in some of their efforts for the runoff election. So that's where we're headed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Misumi. I use she and her. I'm the part-time ED of Rising Voices of Asian American Families. So we're a brand spanking new organization. We just brought on paid staff and began programming right before the pandemic hit. So we knew it was really critical for us to contribute to a coordinated, layered program. I think a lot of folks have mentioned that as well, to ensure that as many API voters received as many effective in-language contacts as possible. And despite our newness, we knew that our effectiveness long-term is really contingent upon our ability to build deep across the state. And we invested in coalition building that will continue post-election, taking inspiration, honestly, from Freedom Inc. We work closely with a multiracial network of organizing groups across the state, including Detroit Action, with whom we partnered on our mutual aid work, We the People Michigan, 482 Forward, Mothering Justice, and We Make Michigan, to ground our organizing in racial justice and using race class narrative strategies. And then specifically for civic engagement, we were able to partner with both APIAVote National, APIAVote Michigan, and our State Voices table to ensure that we were able to send 2 pieces of mail to every single one of the 59,000 API households we could find in the C3 van. And we also partnered with the Burma Center and Battle Creek starting in the summer to help build out their census and fledgling civic engagement program. And through this partnership that's ongoing in our own programming, we're also committed to developing a leadership and trusted messenger pipeline, which other folks have mentioned and may seem obvious, but recruiting directly from our base and through relational organizing, we had volunteers able to communicate in 4 of the different languages represented in the Burmese community in Battle Creek, and reach folks that would not otherwise have been contacted with this information. And we believe, seconding Nancy in Pennsylvania, that the quality of our conversations and contacts really bear out our theory of change, that when women and femme-identifying folks are the civic engagement messengers, our communities move. And we've seen that particularly in Michigan, in counties that had record turnout this year, including Oakland and Kent, that have significant API populations. And I'd also be remiss if we didn't mention the impact of our sister C4 organization, Michigan Asian American Progressives, that ran a digital campaign that had over 5 million impressions, including videos translated into over 8 languages. And the goal there was to turn out and elect progressive APIs up and down the ballot, and we had a really successful year. So looking to build off of that moving forward.
Wonderful. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next panel, but I want to come back to this panel afterwards. And I want to put in your head right now, one of the questions is a number both your, in all three states, you had a number of Asian American Pacific Islanders elected officials that have been building up the last few years. And if you could talk a little bit about how that has played into the work that you're doing and in terms of engaging voters. But right now I'm going to go ahead and turn our attention to the Western and Southwestern states like Nevada, where Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in the state and nearly doubled their early voter turnout from 46,000 in 2016 to 83,000. In addition, like Arizona, according to the Catalyst, they also casted about 72,000 API early voting were cast. And then also Nevada is 83,000. So we'll go ahead and bring on, at first, we have Eric Zhang, the Director of Outreach for Asian Community Development Council. We also have Jennifer Chow, the Program Director for Arizona Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders for Equity. Debbie Chen, the Civic Engagement Programs Director for OCA Greater Houston. Alice Yee, the Chair of the Austin Asian Community Civic Coalition, and Chanda Pardu, founder of Save Texas Education Fund. So we'll go ahead and start out with with Nevada and then head over to Arizona.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you again for giving us this opportunity. My name is Eric Zhang, Director Outreach for Asian Community Development Council, ACDC here in Nevada. So really quick, there is a lot of great stuff we can talk about, but first want to say this is not an overnight success. I want to acknowledge the early support, investment, mentorship from groups like Christine, like APIAVote, like the Coulter Foundation 4 years ago, 2015, 2016. That's when ACDC started doing the civic engagement work. The API groups here, the population is the fastest growing groups, making up almost 10%, 11% of the electorate. In particular, Nevada has the highest rate of unregistered eligible immigrant voters at about 40%. So for us, the civic engagement work never stopped. We started the year with a huge census push, pre-COVID, doing a lot of in-person voter registration. We got lucky, we got through like the Lunar New Year where half of our communities got to do that. And then we started doing issue education following a landmark state legislative session. We saw voter rights restoration for formerly incarcerated folks, auto voter registration through DMV, and most important for us, same-day voter registration. Once COVID started, we switched gear into community care. We did a lot of language access, direct service, such as direct financial relief, meal distribution, and started phone bank on deep canvassing to check in on the community on how if people need resources and how they're impacted. We transitioned to direct voter contact program about August, September through phone banking and no contact lit drop. We start developing QR code for people to, they can take a photo of it and will come to our website with multilingual ways of registration, voter registration. And then we also did a digital and relational organizing campaign to reach out to voters. We sent out 4 flights of API in-language mailers. They're locally produced. We make sure all the language match what the local newspapers are doing. We also advertise in the local ethnic newspaper. We did multiple videos highlighting the API voters, their stories, and VB vote by mail, like education PSAs. I think for us, I know we reach almost 3 million impressions and ran a lot of creative early vote and GOTV events. My favorite ones, we brought baby goats to get people's votes. So for the long lines for both early vote and election day, we have baby goats just checking in on voters. And we started this puppies and boba early vote events where community members actually brought their puppies, and then we gave out about 150 free boba for first-time voters, and people were able to share their voting stories. So I think we saw the early vote went from about 28,000 in 2016 to almost 50,000 in 2020. And total, we're still counting votes, but we should have that total number soon. It's a great, especially being on this panel, seeing all these amazing leaders across the country. I'm just very privileged and honored to be part of this work.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Chow. I'm the program director, founder of AZAA NHPI for Equity. We started last year in the summer, just knowing that 2020 is going to be a big year for census and the election. So I gathered a group of 9 API organizations to really just collaborate on census and voter engagement. So one of the groups I wanted to highlight is the Pacific Islander community. I really looked so there's 2 Pacific Islander communities that we collaborated with as a coalition. They're part of the membership is Island Liaison and CAN-A's COFA Alliance National Network. They have an Arizona chapter that's very new. So the leadership, they've been doing census and voter engagement for many decades. So we were able to provide a lot of resources, but I wanted to give you a little context of Arizona. There's really not that much investment in Arizona in terms of even with nonprofits. All our membership organizations that are part of this group are all volunteer based. Only one organization is funded with 1 or 2 staff. So that was really shocking to me when I moved out here 3 years ago. So a lot of the organization are super grassroots, just do whatever they can to outreach to their communities. So one of Island Liaison and CAN-A, which is new too, but they've been in the community for 20, 30 years. So that's why I wanted to highlight the organization. So one of the things that we really focused on, or the Pacific Islander community, is intergenerational and relational organizing. Since they've already been in the community for a while, they're the trusted messengers. What they were telling me is the best way to get the voter outreach is to really engage with the elders and making sure that they get you have to give them the information, have them understand it. And for example, if it's voting, the elders would be the ones that would go okay, grandchild or family, let's vote. So they are the ones that empower their family, their communities to get out the vote and vote. But I did hire 2 Pacific Islander organizers, and some of the things that they had to do, because a lot of the community members didn't have access to technology or phones and stuff like that. So what they would do is go to their apartments. This even with census, it's doing a presentation in their apartments and stuff like that. And I was just really shocked at how the way they organize, because for them, they're this is the only way we could really outreach to our community, is to just be where they're at. So for example, when we did voter engagement, the organizers would drop off voter registrations forms at their house. This is after COVID. So once they dropped it off, give them a few days to do it, and they'll go pick it up. So they did that just to the community where they know their information. Even if they didn't have they did phone calls. I provided tablets for them. They did phone calls, making sure, hey, did you register to vote? Here's a link, if they have access to online technology and stuff like that. So it's super grassroots, but they were able to get a lot of people to register to vote that way through relational organizing. And other things that we did with the Pacific Islander had high rates of COVID infections, and then the food scarcity and economic security really impacted the community. So we hosted 4 food drives of food giveaways and backpacks. So they would just drive through, pick it up, but at the same time, we were able to do census and voter registration at the same time when they picked up the items. So for us, it's a win-win to be able to provide resources to them and be able to do voter registration and get out the vote. So I wanted to highlight like the super grassroots of organizing within the Pacific Islander communities. But with the Arizona, we were able to really turn out 117% increase in voter turnout. And this is 2 days prior to the elections. But we did a lot of mailers. We dropped 84,000 mailers. We did canvassing. We supported Prop 208, which is the education funding in 2 languages, in Vietnamese and Chinese. That barely passed with a 51%. So, the margin of victory was for that proposition was really tight. But we did a lot of phone banking, we did text banking, we just used a lot of multi-pronged approach in order to outreach to our AA and HPI community. So I'm really happy about like the turnout. And I'm also the executive director and founder of our C4 that just started this year in June. We did a lot of more multi-pronged approach for the C4. So I'm really happy about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's head over to Texas and we'll go ahead and get started with OCA Houston.
Hi, I'm Debbie Chen. I'm the Civic Engagement Programs Director for OCA Greater Houston. And Texas, surprisingly, doesn't actually have a lot of resources for civic engagement work. And actually, our state legislature had voted to not have any funds available to support local government for census outreach. And so the investment that was made by the Culture Foundation and the support from APIAVote and other community partners really made the difference for us to be prepared for a year-round campaign combining census and civic engagement work together. So I believe that the doubling the numbers of AAPIs to turn out to vote during early voting just in Harris County alone, we're still waiting for the numbers from other counties and the actual election day numbers. I think that was all due to the combined efforts of laying census outreach with civic engagement outreach, as well as doing year-round civic engagement relationship building, utilizing our youth program and our different community partners, so that like many other organizations who've spoken already, we were very fortunate to do a lot of on-the-ground work prior to Lunar New Year. And actually, the city of Houston shut down for COVID the day after, on March 11th. It shut down the city, the county actually, the day after the Asian night at the rodeo. So we were literally hauling everything back and dumping everything into garages and then figuring out, okay, what's the next step? And partnering with the Houston Food Bank, partnering with different community organizations, health-based organizations, so that anybody who had any kind of in-person contact event, we were there with information about census, as well as getting people to go out and be prepared to go vote. We changed our Houston Asian American Pacific Islander Film Festival to become virtual. We made our annual youth conference a virtual event and opened it up nationally. We ended up distributing materials to all the different restaurants around town that were still doing takeout, so that they could put information in their takeout bags. And then once we got over the summer and into the early fall, we started doing traditional lit drop canvassing. We canvassed 210,000 households, primarily going into census tracts and areas of the city that actually had the highest number of COVID cases, because that's where a lot of immigrants live and low propensity voters are in the Asian American community. And because of the relationship building we'd done prior to that, if you're not familiar with Houston, Houston's similar to LA in that we're a bunch of different cities and suburbs all strung together in this greater metropolitan area, so that from one end to the other, you could drive 2 hours to get out of Houston alone. So we were very lucky to have different pockets of partners in different areas around the city to be able to do lit drop canvassing in multiple areas and not just the southwest area of Houston. So in addition to the 210 plus thousand households, we were able to phone bank over 100,000+ households. We texted over 40,000 individuals, sending out 130,000 mailers just during the early voting time, and then doing a mix of organic, weekly, virtual outreach events, as well as a targeted digital campaign. So we had over 3.5 million impressions through social media. But I would say that the thing I'm the most proud of is being able to actually involve community members from all over the spectrum to actually come out and volunteer to get people to either register to vote or fill out the census and be counted, or actually go out and vote. I should say Harris County, we opened up early voting 1 extra week. So that made a big difference. And a lot of people in the Asian American community were doing mail-in ballots and were utilizing that early voting extra week of time, where Harris County had opened up drive-through voting lanes at different sites. And then of the 8 sites that were made to become 24-hour voting on one of those days, one of those sites was actually here in the Asiatown area. So we were really happy with that decision that the county had made here in Harris. Unfortunately, because of court challenges that to the drive-through voting, the county ended up shutting down 12 of those drive-through voting sites to just 1 main voting site. But I think that the majority of AAPIs who were able to go through there, because we were helping to coordinate seniors being picked up and taken to go to turn in either their mail-in ballot or to actually physically go and vote. I think a lot of people were able to get through in the first couple weeks of early voting. So I'd say the main takeaway is investing early, right? Starting early is what made the difference.
Wonderful. And let's go ahead over to Austin and then to Dallas.
Hi, this is Alice Yi with the Austin Asian Community Civic Coalition. And I have been partnering with APIAVote for past 7 years. Really, I agree with Debbie said they need to start early. So we start early since APIAVote provide our census training at July 2019. We start our Austin Asian Complete Account Committee and reached over about 150 Asian leaders, business and entities who are willing to join us and form a grassroots network. So we can apply, and we luckily applied and received census grants, so we can provide mini grants to about 20 different organizations with the ethnic, language, faith background on coalition development. We used this census structure and strategy for GOTV efforts with the weekly community meetings, newsletters, candidate forums, and so on with all different Zoom meetings. We used our local company Vote Map for geofencing digital campaign strategy and to targeting large API concentration area and tracks. Those tracks with a low census response and also low voting records. So our message is get counted and go vote for last 2 months since August with about 200,000 audience and over 3 million impressions. We did a lot of text banking and phone banking with APIAVote. And we also did handwriting over 6,000 postcards. The message is just clear, just send out to say, go vote and vote early. So our early voting started October 13th. So our message is sent out before that. And we also had a Facebook ad, and I have to mention that League Women Voter first year provided Vietnamese and Chinese language voters guide that which helped. And because we had such a great census count success stories, our API response, self-response rate is the highest in all population, which include white population. So our local media and newspaper coverage increased to cover us. And that gave us some platform to have our messages sent. We need to be counted and our voice need to be heard. So go vote. This is all the efforts we try to use. And the result, about 50% of eligible API voters in Travis County have cast their ballots in first 2 weeks early voting. And Texas overall had 151% of 2016 total vote turnout. That's just the early voting numbers. So we don't know the election number yet. So still waiting for that. And thank you for having me to represent our AACCC leaders behind me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shannon Harvey and I'm from Dallas, Texas, and my organization is Say Texas. We are the South Asian American Voter Empowerment Group. We started in 2016, and we saw a need to register our community because we understood that 50% of our community is not registered to vote. And this was pretty true for the entire Asian community. So we started doing voter registrations, and along the way, we found out that we had a lot of issues facing our community. Early on in 2017, we found that our community was telling us about the hate crimes against them, and the FBI had started documenting the number of hate crimes to our community. And so that became sort of the policy issues that started facing our community. There were other issues that came to us over the years. We've been doing this for 4 years, and we found that immigration was a big issue for us. So we started to pivot just doing voter registration to making sure that we are present in our community and that we continue to hear the issues facing our community and making sure that we're going to address them. This meant that we shifted from being just a voter registration group to being a community building effort. In 2014, we noticed that only 20% of our population came out to vote. And that meant that we were oftentimes an underrepresented community. And that meant the politicians weren't really coming to visit or knock on our doors or call us because we were often not participating in the political process. So once again, we began to understand that the reason that our issues weren't being heard is because we weren't voting. And so we had to find a way to engage more people. We are so happy to report that in 2020, we had a record number of people come to the polls, and we also had a record number of people registered to vote. In 2020, we had almost 65% of our population vote during early voting. We don't know what the final numbers are, come out to vote. And we also had a record number of people registered to vote at almost 235,000 people across the state of Texas. We did a lot of pivoting, of course, from COVID. We were normally registering anywhere between 1,000 to 4,000 people a month on citizenship ceremonies, and that was no longer accessible to our community. So we started doing no contact voter registration events. We did almost 15,000 across the state of Texas, and had quite a few new people registered to vote at that time. The other things that we did was phone banking, postcarding, and a lot of texting. We really believe in the relationship organizing. So our organization is broken up into state teams, and we have different groups across the state of Texas. And if there is some kind of voter suppression happening, it happens in Texas. So it was really nice to have the regional teams being able to address what's happening in their communities and to talk about, like in Houston, we had 20 odd some mail-in drop-offs, and now you were only down to 1. So having a regional team was essential. And for the Asian community, I think relationship organizing is key. And so we really use that as a way to do voter outreach. Our organization was instrumental in reaching out to anybody that needed language assistance. When it came to coming to the polls, we had WhatsApp groups that were lighting up during the entire time that we had early voting going on if anybody needed language assistance. So that was very helpful. But I think the takeaway that we need to take away, I think, from what everybody is saying in this group is that we need to have early investment within our communities, and we need to be there 365 days a year. When we had, when we had the hate crimes issue, when we had the immigration policy issues come up within our community, and of course the COVID issues coming up, we need to be a community that's always there and present and make sure that we have our voices heard. And, like I said, in 2014, we weren't heard. And so we need to make sure that we reach out to our elected officials and let them know who we are. We did reach out to several elected officials who are not familiar with the definition of the South Asian community and what our needs are. And going forward, we really need to make sure that all of us stay connected and make sure that our voices are heard. And thank you so much for letting me be a part of the panel. I really appreciate it.
Hey, wonderful. While we bring on everyone back, if all of our panelists can turn on their videos. One of the questions I do as we get started especially for Nevada, since you were in this like probably a decade ago, people were not paying attention to Nevada. So what are some lessons learned from that, especially as we are looking at how suddenly, the API community is being paid attention in Arizona and Texas and all these other locations?
For me?
Yes.
So I think I mentioned it briefly. Oh, wow, look at all these photos of stuff. But it's like investment like your group, like the Coulter Foundation, after the 2010 census and the ACS that saw the growth of our API community, that's 180% fastest growing minority. I think that's happening everywhere too. I know Debbie's here. Harris County has one of the fastest growing overall population overall, and then Maricopa is number 4 in county with overall growth. So I think that's where I think that's why I think a lot of my fellow panelists and also a lot of amazing women leaders and mentioned that GOTC, get out the count for census, is so important. It gives us not only the overall API stats, but also the breakdown. And then for us too, Nevada is now, especially Vegas, is also called the 9th island because of so many residents of Hawaii or Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander are moving here. So for us, I'm really, really impressed by what Jennifer mentioned, what they're able to do in Arizona. Like when we grow up, we want to be able to do Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander outreach like that. But for us, we found out through the county registrar that we can purchase voter registration data by place of birth. So we found out that especially for Guam, for the Chamorros, for Samoa, we do have pockets of communities that we were able to include them into our data for phone bank outreach, for our mailer, for our digital ads. And I'm pretty excited for the potential to do more, and also very excited to see like the shift to the focus to Texas and Arizona, and how that there's so much opportunities.
Great. So let me go ahead and go back to the Midwest, or anyone that wants to jump in regards to how the APIs running for office, how that actually played into turning out the electorate. If anyone wants to jump in.
I can jump in for that. This is Laura Misumi from Rising Voices of Asian American Families again in Michigan. I think for us, one of our board members actually was running for office at the same time. She is the first Hmong American to attain elected office in Michigan. And so I think for us, it was really an exciting time to see so many Asian Americans running in different parts of the state where we knew that there are growing API populations, particularly in Oakland and Macomb counties as that are traditionally where that most APIs are in Michigan. So I think for us, it was really an opportunity to kind of double down on our strategies around suburban voter contact and doing specific outreach and targeted outreach in those geographies.
And if I could add to that, over here in like Canton, Michigan, we elected a Canton trustee that was Indian American, as well as a state representative that was Indian American. And I think it makes some of the groundwork in terms of getting out the vote a little bit easier when you see candidates that reflect the
And I just want to just point in Wisconsin, we did have a candidate in Dane County, which we have our first API in the state legislature now. But we've historically had have a lot of local API elected officials, and I think like just having that has shown and really help inspire our communities to turn out and vote, because it really shows that every vote counts, and especially in those local elections where a lot of these other API individuals got elected into office because every person turned out to vote, and many were winning by like less than 100 votes. And so like that showing has really I think made an impact in these bigger elections, because now in the past 4 years our community is seeing that has really made them really realize like their vote actually counts, unlike before where they felt like their votes didn't count.
Right. So we have a question here that 2020 was a unique election due to Trump, 4 years of non-normal and COVID-19. Nationally, Asian turnout was 40%. So going forward, what are some grassroots strategies to get at least the same turnout in 2022 and 2024? Anyone?
Yeah, I think, you know, at Freedom Inc. and our coalition partners, we've always had this long goal, this long dream of building lifelong socially conscious voters. So we weren't interested in just voting, turning out folks to vote for one election. We were interested in the continuous political education and politicizing our communities. And so I think for us, that's our long-term strategy, is really like continuing that politicizing and building leaders within our community. And we're seeing now how our leadership pipeline really has worked.
And then if one of you guys can comment about youth engagement, and also we had another question of like who had worked on focusing on women voters as well.
Hi, this is Linda. So our organization, we are led by youth and young Asian people. And so we've been doing this work since 2015. And so a lot of our work is similar to what Chai has said, is having a long-term strategy that really develops and supports and fosters the civic leadership of young Asian people, making sure that the voices and stories are co-created by young people so that they feel more represented. And I also wanted to touch on the question previous before too around Minnesota representation of elected official. We do have over 300,000 API in Minnesota, and API make up 5.7% of the Minnesota's electorate. The number of eligible Asian American voters in Minnesota did grow by 43% between 2012 and 2018. So we have 155,000 eligible voters. And the majority of those voters are Hmong voters. And so there were dozens of Asian candidates that did run for office this election, particularly in the Hmong community. Since the 1990s, we continue to have an increase of Hmong candidates running for office for the first time or for re-election in seats ranging from city council, school board, representatives, state, senate, and judges. We currently have 10 Hmong elected officials that won re-election or newly elected in this election, and they do serve where majority of our Hmong Asian communities do reside. It's also really like refreshing to see that a good amount of those elected officials are young people themselves, and those for us, our work that we've been building was around increasing voter registration, voter education. Now, the key vision that we have is to really strengthen the relationship with our young people, to like elected officials and leaders, to talk about issues that impact them as young people. So again, centering youth voice, creating space for young people who can come to talk about how if they want to run for office in the next 5 to 10 years. And so those are the key things that we're thinking about, building that pipeline that has been strong since the 1990s with having a stray of Hmong elected officials being elected.
And if anyone want to close this out with any discussion about women voters?
know I talked before, but just really quickly, I think, it kind of goes back to our overall organizing and base building strategy and creating this leadership pipeline amongst Asian American women in our communities, and really believing that when Asian American women are the trusted messenger, that's how we're going to have better contacts, better connections, and conversations with voters, particularly API women voters. And so we are really excited this year. Our entire civic engagement phone banking staff of 9 were all API women who were recruited from our base building events and through relational organizing. So that was something that we were really excited about, and definitely something that we're going to continue moving forward.
Yes, continue investing in women. Investing in one woman is actually investing in the whole community, and we've seen that turn out voters. So
wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to all of our partners for all the amazing work, because it really is about what happens locally. And thank you to all of you for taking the interest in terms of understanding the stories behind these amazing numbers that we're seeing. There was a lot of questions in regards to when will we see disaggregated data? When will we have numbers by state? So just to provide you some context is that a lot of this data that we're talking about today was really just about early voting data that did come out, some analysis that came out in mid-October. Now, we are still waiting for all the voter files to be updated, so that way we will see the comprehensive view of everyone that voted through early voting, absentee, as well as on election day. But many times those voter files won't be updated until March or April of 2021. So at that time, there will be a deeper analysis, and also the US Census also does an analysis as well and provides that. So we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. And I know once again, there's different ways and opportunities for you to also get involved locally in each of your states. So this event has been recorded. We will be sharing this so that way you can share it with others, but we will also provide contact information for each of these partners, because the work does continue on as we move forward. So thank you once again for all your participation today, and we look forward to continue working with all of you. Thank you.